Everybody, and welcome to this, our second in the series of URJ faculty webinars. My name is Barbara Seidel. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the URJ. Today we have two fabulous URJ faculty members to lead our conversation, Lisa Colton and Allison Fine. Lisa and Allison will discuss how your congregation can use social media as vehicles for creating community and strengthening relationships that exist both virtually and within the walls of the synagogue. Participants will have the opportunity to ask questions. As Adam said, please use your questions log, and we will try and initiate some conversation. Lisa Colton is Chief Learning Officer for C3 Communications and the founder and president of Darim Online, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping Jewish organizations succeed in the digital age. She provides training, consulting, and coaching to staff and volunteer leadership of synagogues, schools, camps, foundations, social service organizations, and others. She's a graduate of Stanford University and has been both extremely helpful to the URJ in running our social media boot camp in 2012. Allison Fine is the co-author of the best-selling The Networked Nonprofit, which I recommend highly, and author of the award-winning Momentum, Igniting Social Change in the Connected Age. She's a senior fellow on the democracy team at Demos, a New York-based think tank. She blogs about the intersection of social media and social change at a.fine.blog. She also hosts a monthly podcast for the Chronicle of Philanthropy called Social Good. Allison has a BA from Vanderbilt and an MPA from NYU, and I'm going to hand it over to Lisa. Lisa might be on mute.
Hello, everybody. I'm so glad to be here. Can you hear me now, Barbara?
Yep.
Hi, everyone. It's Lisa Colton here. Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be collaborating with the URJ and other faculty members like my friend Allison Fine. And thrilled to see so many of you, many names I recognize on the line with us today. I wanted to just preface our conversation by characterizing the mode and the moment that we're going through right now as a revolution. And I mean this not because we have a whole bunch of new technology and widgets and gadgets that's changing the way that we communicate and what we communicate about, but to really understand all of the ripple effects and the implications of that for society, for Jews in our communities, and for synagogues as nonprofit organizations and centers of community. So on your screen you see an image of the printing press, and the printing press was one major technological innovation, but it did not just stop with this piece of steel that printed a lot of books, because what changed really had much broader implications for individuals and society as a whole. The lesson of the printing press is not actually about a piece of technology. It's about literacy. And when books were printed and the price of them went through the floor, we saw many more people being able to get their ideas out into the world, many, many more people able to consume those ideas that were being shared because they finally became literate. They could get their hands on books, and therefore it was worthwhile to learn how to read. And once they learned how to read, they were able to go to school, and once educated, engaged in civic society in a whole new way. So following the printing press for several hundred years, in fact, we see economic, social, political, and religious revolution because of this one piece of technology. We also see job descriptions shifting significantly. For example, if you're a scribe, unless you're writing Torah scrolls, you're basically out of a job once the printing press comes around. We also see those shifts in careers and jobs and skills happening today. The newspaper and magazine industry is just one of them. But we see many new jobs popping up, and today I'll be encouraging you to think as well about the skills and staffing and time allocation in your synagogue that will help position you to be successful in this age. Next slide, please. So I want to be contrasting the printing press example and the revolution that it supported with today's communication technology and how that's changing the way that we work. In front of you, you see an image that's simply just a map of one person's network on Facebook. The little black dots you see are the profile pictures, and the blue lines are the quote-unquote friend connections between and among them. And you may notice a few sort of interesting visual things jumping out at you in this image. In the top left corner, for example, you see a big group of people, all of whom are connected to one individual. And this is very important as we think about reaching out into our communities for individuals or families who are not affiliated with a synagogue, and how they might learn about a congregation, become interested in it, find connections, and eventually participate in programs, in school, in becoming a member. And what I want to convey to you in this image is that as we talk about the rules of the game changing, not unlike the revolutions that happened with the printing press, you are no longer a broadcaster of information to individuals. You may be one that's creating content, and you may be sort of a hub where people come together and connect with one another. But in today's highly connected world, where we have so much content and information coming at us in so many different directions, individuals are always going to be more authentic and trustworthy than institutions. So this individual in this top left corner who's so highly connected is a tremendous asset for you. So as we think about social media and your social media use in your congregation, I encourage you to pinch yourself regularly and make sure that you are not broadcasting out one directional from the hub of the synagogue, but rather connecting to individuals who are themselves connected to the target audiences that you're seeking to reach. Next slide, please. In today's connected landscape, we need to really be asking ourselves some very deep questions. So my question to you right now is, what is a congregation? Go ahead and type into the chat window a few words, phrases, sentences. What comes to mind when you think of this question? What is a congregation? I was working with a group of synagogue leaders recently in New York, and I asked them this question and handed them Play-Doh and had them actually sculpt with Play-Doh what is a congregation. And what I can tell you is that as those people sat around a table and really thought deeply about their synagogue and their congregation, they did not sculpt out of Play-Doh a building, whether it's an old architectural building, whether it's a new LEED certified, very modern, edgy one. The sense of what is a congregation is about the people and about the connections to one another and about the values and the shared assets that bind us together, that we are responsible for one another. And this, I think, just illustrates how we need to be shifting in our thinking and our strategy and our communications from being a walled brick, institution-focused culture to a very light and airy people and relationship-focused culture. So while social media and social media tools are really essential tools for helping us do this, what I want to impress upon you today is that if you don't have the mindset correct at the beginning, then all of the ways that you're going to use those tools are going to just be sort of a dead end, right? You'll achieve some incremental success on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube, but if you shift your thinking and your perspective and your goals and measurement to be thinking about people and relationships and connectivity, all sorts of very interesting things can happen. Next slide, please.
So one of the things
Barbara?
we thought, one of the things we thought we might share with you, just to give you a sense of what can happen in just really a year and a half to 2 years, is that just about a year ago, the URJ dedicated a full-time person. Before this, it had been part of one or two people's jobs. We dedicated a full-time person to being responsible for our social media presence. And in just that time, we have about 8,000 Facebook fans, about 9,700 Twitter followers, and a blog that we post every day that has about 17,000 unique visitors in the last month alone. We do this every day, all the time, reacting with as many people every day as we can. Next slide, Sally. One of the things that you can see is the exponential growth, and be aware of the fact that we post every day in our voice. So this is a picture of our Facebook page. And the next slide, we have a picture of our Twitter feed. You can go. It's been important for us that we have dedicated staff. And as you'll, I'm sure, recognize for yourselves, it's difficult to measure the success, but it does drive traffic to our site and to our news site, reformjudaism.org, and to our blog. Next slide. Allison?
Yes, hi. Thank you for having me, Barbara, and thanks to Lisa as well for being my partner. I wanted to share a story about a small college in North Carolina. Meredith College is a women's-only college, about 2,000 undergrads, and throughout the recession, when one would think that women's colleges might really struggle, they've really been thriving. And through a whole bunch of reasons, you know, they have a fantastic, charismatic president. But one thing that they've done is they've really embraced Facebook in a really fun and interesting way. Their library got a small grant, I think it was $2,000 or $3,000, to take all of their old yearbooks and digitize them. And then they've taken the photos from the yearbook and they've posted them, and they've been asking their Facebook friends and followers to tag the photos. Who do you know from the class of 1963? And then the alumni start a conversation. Gee, who's that girl on the, the second to right, on the first row? Who, anybody remember her? Can you find her? So the alumni are actually finding each other and bringing them to the page. In addition, they're also bumping into current students on the page, and they're helping one another. So the current students help the former students to stay connected, and then the alumni are giving them employment and job advice, all sorts of career and life advice as well. So it was this really wonderful model of, they started with something fun and natural, and it built out from there. They didn't start with a great global plan. Next slide, please. So Lisa showed us some pictures of networks, which can look very busy. At their core, they're very, very simple things. If you remember, Tinker Toys, and you can tell somebody's age by whether their Tinker Toys were wooden or plastic, and they just have two parts. They have the round wooden part, and in network speak, that's a node, which is a person or an organization, and then they have the sticks that connect them, and those are ties or relationships. And I think it's helpful to think about those ties as straws instead of solids. They're straws because something goes between them, and that something is social capital, trust and reciprocity, and the love, frankly, that happens between people. You can create these relationships online. I've known Beth Cantor for a very long time online, and we've written 2 papers and a book together, and before the book was published, we had met together in person one time. Or, of course, you have your on-land connections, your relatives, your friends, your congregants, and those are increasingly coming online as well. What's important to remember is that we have always lived in social networks. We called them tribes at one point. We called them shtetls at another point. Now we call them congregations, and that doesn't change. And so when it feels very unsettling about what's happening online with all of these tools and these gadgets and widgets and buttons, it's important to remember that at the core of it are ways of relating to one another that we've always had. Next slide. So what is the stuff that's going on out there, all these tools? You finally get your Facebook account up and running, and some smarty pants says to you, well, aren't you on Google Plus or Foursquare or something else? And then you spend all night wondering if you have to be on that new thing. And the answer is no, you don't have to be on that new thing. But you do have to know a couple of things. One is that all social media tools have a similar DNA. They are called social media for a reason. And that's because they're inexpensive, not free, but inexpensive, easy to use. If you're struggling with using a social media tool, it's probably because you haven't had enough practice with it. And I strongly advise you to find a friend, a colleague, the daughter of a friend of yours who can spend some time with you and help you to be on the tool. It's important that you are on some channel somewhere, Facebook or Twitter or blogs, whatever it is. And then the last two are awfully, awfully important for our kinds of efforts with congregations, and that is that it's two-way. You heard Lisa say that you can't use social media to continue to broadcast out messages as we did before. Social media work by and through conversation, through people talking back and forth to one another, people, not organizations. And so folks who are online are expecting to be in conversation with your congregation. And if instead they feel like they're going into a black hole when they ask a question, or that they just continue to talk to a logo, it will feel like a very unsocial and unwelcoming place. And that's awfully important. And then the last thing is that it's all scalable. We see this every day, that some video has gone viral. It goes viral because a friend tells a friend about it, and they tell a friend, and so on. And the really neat thing for our efforts is it doesn't cost any more after our initial efforts of creating the content or putting the content out for friends to pass it to friends. It doesn't always happen that way. You have to set the stage for it to happen. And that is the next slide. So when Lisa talked about having a culture that embraces this way of working, that welcomes it, that enables it to happen, this framework, the Network Nonprofit Framework, is the diagram of that culture. When we looked at organizations that are very good at using social media, they all had this particular framework. They were working on being a certain way, the left-hand side of the column, that enabled them to do certain things out there with people. So they had to understand networks, what we just covered. They had to create a social culture. Social culture means that we are in conversation with people about our work as it's unfolding, not just presenting strategic plans that are done, or come to our dinner dance on March 18th and buy your tickets now, which would be very different than backing up 3 months and saying, what do you want to do for our spring fundraiser, and opening it up for a conversation. Listening, engaging, and building relationships is absolutely critical to the thriving of congregations in the future. We have to move away from transactions. How many people do we have in seats? Counting numbers of members, which we have gotten in the habit of doing, and move towards really deeply engaging with members who want to be engaged that way. I was thinking the other day that when I've heard congregants complain over the last several years as Temple president, beneath it all, regardless of what the content was, whether somebody took my parking spot, or I didn't get a thank you, or I didn't get a call in the hospital even though I didn't tell anybody I was in the hospital, the substance of that complaint is always the same thing, which is, you don't care about me and I don't matter. And that goes right to the heart of that box right there. The next thing is trust through transparency. People can see what we're doing now in ways they never could before. We ought to embrace it. We ought to have a good financial narrative to tell people about where their money goes and what the results are of using that money. And we ought to be, again, in conversation with people to make it clear about how we work and why we do what we do. And the last thing is simplicity, which is awfully, awfully hard for synagogues, because it only takes one Jew to overcomplicate the world, and we do that really, really well. But we have to get down to very simple stories that we tell about why Temple is meaningful for our congregants, about why it's important that we exist, about why people matter to us in our equation. When we're working on those things on the left-hand side, then we can begin to really engage with larger numbers of people online, engage them in real conversation about our work, and eventually turn them into people who are interested in participation and governance and fundraising and a whole bunch of other things. Next slide. So here's the problem. The problem is, in a lot of congregations, this looks and feels very scary. I understand that. And so the ensuing conversation internally, maybe at the board table or at senior staff, wherever it is, or at a committee, these issues will come up. If somebody begins to say, well, we ought to be online talking about our programs before we finalize next year's efforts, or maybe we should put a draft budget up online, or our youth group should be talking to teens online. And these issues will invariably come up. It is awfully, awfully important that these kinds of concerns are used as conversation starters, not conversation stoppers. It would be very easy to walk away from any of the things that Lisa and I will talk to you about because there's the potential for something to go wrong. There's always the potential for something to go wrong. But by stopping at that point, you've lost the enormous opportunity to engage with people differently in your congregation, to take down the walls, and to really build relationships with them. So you'll hear next from Lisa, who will tell you about the opportunities to learn more about what other congregations are doing. But I really strongly want to urge that when you begin to hear comments like this, you recognize it as an opening and not a closed brick wall. Over to you, Lisa.
Thanks, Allison. I love hearing you say all of your insights over and over and over again. I always learn something, Allison. I appreciate it.
Over and over and over again, huh?
Yeah, it's fantastic. I always learn something. I want to just point out to everyone that in your little control panel, there is a space called the chat. And if that's closed for you, go ahead and open it up, because we're sharing some comments and insights, and I want to encourage you to also share your thoughts and examples in your work there too. And we also see that a number of you are asking questions in the questions answer, which is totally fine as well. So I want to reiterate a lot of what Allison has said in terms of taking risks and starting to shift the way that you do. And I think in the Jewish community, oftentimes our instincts and our culture is resistant to change. And that's been a really good thing for our survival over thousands and thousands of years. However, at this moment in time, it actually may be a huge liability for us, because the way that individuals, families, and communities are communicating and taking action and allocating their time and attention is very, very different than it has been in the past. One of the things that I love about the work that I do in sort of social media and leadership in the Jewish community is that I think the tools and culture at our disposal today are very well aligned with congregational culture. Right? When people are living in a virtual world, that personal connection really matters. When a lot of research shows that individuals have a whole bunch of quote-unquote friends, but they're looking for deeper connection, that really plays to our strengths. And in a time where people are craving depth and support in parenting and how they incorporate values, again, it brings people back to their Jewish roots and to a synagogue community. But what I find is that when we work in this hub and spokes mode, we actually are forcing people to swim upstream. And that's one thing that today's society is very resistant to. You want things that are super easy, one click away, the customer service and the high quality is right there. I can have somebody fix my internet by tweeting Comcast while I'm at work, and I get home at 6 o'clock tonight, and there's a new internet box sitting on my doorstep, and my account's been upgraded, right? So that kind of accessibility, communication, customer service is something that is now a norm in our community, and we need to be adapting, even though we're often resistant to change. We need to be adapting what we do and how we do it fairly quickly, because we know for the next several decades at the very least, and potentially much longer, change is going to be the name of the game. So if the rate of change and the scale of change is making you feel overwhelmed now, my message is get used to it and figure out how to change along with it rather than being resistant. Like Allison said, oftentimes issues come up that we consider conversation stoppers. But in fact, not changing is likely more risky than changing today, even if we don't really know where that change is going to lead us. small experiments and evolution in culture as well as strategy is going to be very important for helping synagogues remain nimble and viable for many years to come. So this hub and spokes model we're looking at is sort of the old way of doing things, where the synagogue is in the center and we have individual connections to families that radiate out in these one-on-one connections. But while you'll realize that the synagogue as the hub in the center is fairly large, the individuals are less connected to one another, right? This is we come to a program, our tush is in the seats, our attendance is recorded, we pay our dues. Some people definitely know each other, but that's not really the explicit goal of the congregation or the synagogue. And in an age where the vast majority of Jews joined synagogues and were dutiful members and organized their lives around that, right? Allison said the tribe or the shtetl or all these other sort of models of where that happened, this worked just fine. But in today's communities where Reform congregations are operating, this is not a given anymore. And thus it's one of those changing rules of the game that we need to acknowledge and respond to. Next slide, please. In our network mindset, and this is just another network image. You can do it out of Tinker Toys. You can do it out of Facebook graphs. Here's another network map where the blue dots are what we consider the core. Those are individuals who are highly connected to others. You'll see each blue dot has 10 or 20 connections to other dots in this network. The green dots are what we call the periphery. And the periphery are people who have 1 or 2, maybe 3 connections to other people in this network. They're probably highly connected to folks outside of the network as well, but they're less integrated into the core. Often I find that synagogues focus on spending a lot of time and attention with the people who are in the core. So we recruit people to committees and boards and to chair events and to have an aliyah and lots of other things, the people that we know and we talk to a lot. And we end up allocating a lot of our time and attention to those folks and sort of neglecting the periphery. Or we decide that the people who are on the periphery should be core members and that we work to bring them into the core, which is great, but really the goal is to connect them to one another, not just to connect them to the institution. So I want to encourage you in your strategy and culture and staffing to think about connect and collaborate rather than being a command and control center. So how can the staff and the volunteers and the programs and the structures in your congregation, as well as your communications and social media and other sort of messaging, help to facilitate connections between and among individuals? So think about your print newsletter or your weekly e-newsletter. How many of those things are a message from the president or the rabbi, and how much of it is really helping individuals in your community get to know each other better, for example? Look at your Facebook posts. How many of those are holding up a megaphone announcing particular events or asking people to donate or volunteer? And how much of it is featuring the stories of people and activities that are happening within your community? And when I say within your community, I don't necessarily mean within the walls of your synagogue or the official programs of your synagogue, but rather the people who make up your congregation. And I encourage you to also think about how you reach out to the periphery and connect those people to one another programmatically in addition to communications. For example, my synagogue here in Charlottesville, Virginia, I think Catherine, our executive director, is on the line with us here today, did a program called Shabbat Connections. And the staff of the synagogue helped to facilitate small groups of families that had something in common, sometimes geography, sometimes the age of their kids, to get together for Shabbat once a month. And what those groups did was totally up to them, but it really helped to deepen those social connections, to be in each other's homes with some regularity throughout the year. And that's really a great example of connecting people to one another. Next slide, please. We have many examples of congregations doing really great work in social media. And as Barbara mentioned before, we have done a year-long social media boot camp with many URJ congregations. We had hundreds of people who registered and participated in it. In a few minutes, we'll give you the link to that and also in a follow-up email. So if you want tutorials on particular tools like Facebook or Twitter or other things, all of that is there and for the taking with lots of screenshots and examples of what congregations are doing. What I want to convey to you today are 4 really critical roles that will help you evolve and mature from being the synagogue that posts all of their programs and events on Facebook to one that is really doing this connecting and socializing in a deep and well-aligned way to be successful in our connected age. So these 4 roles come from a woman named June Hawley, who's sort of the mother of this term network weaving. And the idea of a network weaver is somebody who intentionally makes connections between individuals for mutual benefit. Right? So making a connection between 2 people for mutual benefit might be 2 parents, both of whom have children on the autistic spectrum, and they should know each other. Right? That doesn't necessarily mean that what they're talking about is Jewish, but they both happen to be Jewish, they both happen to be part of the synagogue community, and that might be a mutually beneficial connection for those 2 people to be talking to one another. Right? Maybe they're talking about how to educate their children Jewishly if they don't fit into a classic classroom. Or maybe it's 2 middle-aged, or maybe more than 2 middle-aged people who have parents who live far away who have Alzheimer's. And those people may have a lot in common and want to be helping each other. So there's lots of different examples of why connecting people and being that network weaver can be incredibly valuable for strengthening connections under the umbrella of the synagogue. And what we know is the stronger those connections, the more dividends are paid. The people come to programs together, they look forward to seeing each other, their children get to know each other more. Oftentimes in congregations that really have aligned themselves to work in this way, there are self-initiated projects that sort of rise to the surface. And that also begs a question about what is the role of the traditional program director versus empowering individuals in your community to be thinking about what would be valuable and interesting to them and sort of helping to birth those programs within the context of your congregation. So these 4 roles I think are really useful to just be sort of explicit about. In some cases, it's one person who's doing multiple roles. In some cases, you have multiple people doing each role, but only taking on one of these facets. And all 4 of these roles are very applicable to the largest urban congregation and the smallest rural congregation as well, and everyone in between. These roles, I think, should be part of job descriptions. So whether you have a very small staff or a quite large one, I encourage you to think about who on your staff can be doing one or multiple of these roles. But they also lend themselves very, very well to volunteers. And being sort of explicit about it and helping train people around these, I think, is very important. So again, it is a role and a function that should be encompassed in your staff. There may be things that your staff is currently doing that they can let go of to make some room for this, and also something that volunteers can be doing. So the connector catalyst is sort of the classic network weaver role that's helping to connect people, build the network, right, all those little lines between and among people, and to build that social culture. A network guardian is someone who puts in place the systems. So this might be somebody who's setting up and managing your Facebook page and your Twitter account, or the quote-unquote accidental techie who can then be a support to other staff and volunteers who need to know a little bit more about, how do I tag someone in a photo, or what does a hashtag mean, right? So the network guardian is sort of sometimes very behind the scenes, helping to create those structures as needed. The self-organized project coordinator is sort of the modern version of a classic program director. Somebody who's there to assist, support, coordinate, cheerlead, connect people. Oh, these 3 people with infants are interested in having an infant play group in the synagogue. That's never even occurred to us. Let me put you guys in contact. and let me know what afternoon works well for you, and we'll find a place for you to meet in the congregation. And the network facilitator is somebody who helps set up a more explicit and focused network. So as you start making moves towards working in a more social and networked way, this might be somebody who's sort of leading that charge and helping you think about what are the next steps. Maybe you have a Facebook page now, but as you get more traction on that, you want to start talking about setting up additional Facebook groups that might be more conversational and a little bit more specific for various demographics of your congregation, etc. So these are 4 different attributes of network weaving roles, and I encourage you to think about how you can be incorporating those more. There are a few questions that have come up in our question window, which I want to address. First of all, somebody asked about a social media policy, which I think is fantastic. Thank you for asking that question. We created this past fall a social media policy workbook. It has 10 different worksheets that take you through what we think are 10 really essential conversations, starting from values and mission and vision, going through privacy issues, privacy and permissions, how to respond to negative comments, about listening and monitoring. So I think it's a really great sort of social media tutorial because it really begs a lot of questions that might get overlooked or only come up in sort of urgent situations. We had somebody who created a social media policy with this workbook. And it was a school, and they had a complaint from a parent that came up in social media that they thought was not appropriate. But because they had gone through the workbook and had talked really deeply about what it meant to have honest conversations and not be sort of that command and control culture, when this issue came up, they didn't react, they didn't freak out. They went back and thought about their conversations and what they had created in their policy and figured out how to handle that situation in a much more mature and frankly much more effective way than sort of shutting this person down. What they ended up doing is asking a few other very involved parents. It was a video. Somebody had commented on a video that they put up, and they just asked a few other parents to come and check out the video and drop a comment on Facebook, not in reaction to the negative comment that was already there, just as a way to sort of have a counterbalance. And it worked great. But if they hadn't had a social media policy, they might have reacted in a very reactionary way that could have had really poor repercussions if that parent found their comment was deleted, for example. Now, of course, there are reasons why you might delete a comment, but as Allison said before, these should be conversation starters, not stoppers. And what we found in the congregational space, as well as others, is that those sort of very negative and threatening comments almost never happen. So at urj.org/bootcamp, this link that's here on the screen in front of you, you will find a link to download that social media policy workbook. It's a free download, a PDF, thanks to the URJ. And I encourage you to print out a couple copies and put a group of people together and actually walk through those 10 different worksheets. I think you'll find that your conversation and your social culture and social media use will mature significantly just by having those conversations. At that link, you can also find links to the recorded versions of dozens of webinars that we've done over the past year. Those include very basic sessions like Intro to Facebook and Intro to Twitter, as well as strategy level sessions on those various tools and some more sophisticated conversations about synagogues as network nonprofits, for example. And the last link here is our Facebook group for the URJ Social Media Bootcamp. And we are having ongoing conversations there. I encourage you to join it and to share the work that you are doing. Feel free to ask questions. There's hundreds of people from URJ congregations there who are thinking about and doing all the same things that you are. And it takes a team. So use that space to ask questions for us to critique your work and to share what's going well.
Lisa, we also have a question that maybe Allison can take, which is from Ted David, who said that they have an older demographic in the synagogue, many of the members in the sort of average age of about 67, and at the same time that there's a younger group with a full religious school. And I think maybe there might be a very interesting split strategy that might work. Does either one of you want to pick it up?
I will start, and Lisa can always jump in. So we want to be careful not to make assumptions about who's online and who's not. Fastest growing segment on Facebook are women over 50 because they want to see photos of their grandkids. It's also an opportunity, though, to have a workshop to help your folks get onto Facebook because I'm guessing if they're not on, some of them might be quite open to learning what all this stuff is about. We did that at our synagogue last year. Now, we had the benefit of Mark Zuckerberg's dad, Ed, leading the workshop because he's a congregant, so that got us a full house. But we had an outpouring of older congregants there who wanted to learn how to do this, so that's great fun. Then we've also created a Facebook group just for our religious school, in particular for families leading up to B'nai Mitzvah to ask one another questions. You know, what's this part of the service, and who's used this caterer? And it's become a very robust conversation for them. And things we used to do by email or by mailing people in hard copy, we're now doing almost entirely on Facebook with our families. Lisa, you want to add anything?
This is Lisa. I'll just add that we're living in a multi-channel world. And regardless of the age or other demographics, different people work in different ways. So there are some people who spend their whole day in front of a computer at a desk. There are some people, like, let's just say, real estate agents, who are driving all over town and live an incredibly mobile culture, which is really why Twitter became so popular. Twitter was developed as a mobile business productivity tool, which is why it's sort of started with text messaging and is limited to 140 characters. Teens and millennials are a whole different demographic in terms of not just what tools they use, but how they communicate and fit it into their lives. So what I would recommend to all of you, not only Ted who asked the question, is that you need to adopt a multi-channel strategy, period. Some people are going to be in one place, some people are going to be in another place, some people are going to be in multiple places. It's all fine, it's all good, that's just the name of the game. So don't think that your one print newsletter or your one e-newsletter is actually going to get to all the people. Now, one of the interesting shifts as we move to social media is that more of it is measurable. So, for example, when you print a 24-page print bulletin and you send it out every month, you can think about how many hours and how many dollars you spend actually doing that. It's almost impossible to measure how many people read it, how many people throw it in the trash or recycling. And of the people who read it cover to cover, do they come more, give more, feel more connected, etc.? With e-newsletters, we have a little bit better measurement tools. We can see how many people open it and how many people click through. Good open rates are around 35%, and that's good. So you can think that you're probably only reaching a third of the people at best, and most of those people probably open it, glance, and move on, and don't actually read a lot in detail or click through to very much stuff. With things like a Facebook page and Twitter, it's much more measurable. We can see how many people are looking at it, how many people have liked or commented and engaged with it, how many people have shared or retweeted that content. So there's many more measurement tools to understand what's resonating and how it's working with, deeply with a small number of people or broadly with a much larger group of people. But Ted, my advice to you would be to just acknowledge that you're going to have a multi-channel strategy. I don't think you're all that different than anyone else, even though your demographics might be a little bit more towards the extremes, especially if we're looking to engage young families, and even more so to speak to millennials and the generation after them, for them to understand that synagogues are relevant and in conversation with them. We need to be spending some time and energy on these social media tools. It's no longer optional.
Barbara, again, one of the questions that I see, sorry, Allison?
No, go ahead, Barbara.
One of the questions that I see has to do with, is from Laura Aronson, who says that her synagogue in New Hampshire is small and struggling to grow and limited in manpower and funds. For those of you for whom this might be a surprise, over 300 of the URJ's congregations have no full-time clergy and are in the category that we consider small. And when you're needing to attract more young families or to reach out into the community to attract intermarried families, it really is important to think about what your strategy should be on social media and to see whether there are volunteers who might be able to step into the role of being the network weaver, of being able to create the Facebook page. And you may not have the staff to do this, but you may just find one family that's really interested in finding others of like mind and starts to get the ball rolling. It's certainly true what Lisa said about families who are looking for others who have shared interests, shared commitments, for example, and would use Facebook anyway. You know, they're already there.
Right, this is Allison. I totally agree, Barbara. Right now I'm in the process of training two congregants, a woman who's a stay-at-home mom and another woman who was laid off last year as our network weavers. And in particular, for the woman who was laid off, I think this could really be a huge advantage to her when she perhaps looks for another job, of having this skill set that she can showcase as well. I think for most of the synagogues I know that are medium to small size, having staff do this is probably too much, but you get the added benefit when a congregant is doing this. It's one of us. You know, it's like showing up at Oneg and having a congregant who's taking you by the hand and introducing you to other people. It's really a really lovely feel to it. So I think there's just great value in finding, identifying a couple of volunteers. And the way I found these two people was they were the people who happened to be posting the most on our page. So they're just doing this anyway. So now we're going to steer them a little bit to get a little bit more intentional about weaving the network. And I think it's a wonderful way to take down the walls between staff and congregants.
Hugely. I totally agree, Allison. And yeah. I'll also mention that I think it was about a year ago, I wrote an article for the URJ magazine. So I know you all keep stacks of those in your libraries, and you should pull it out. And in there's a number of examples from congregations on these various attributes and some recommendations. One of them, which I'll just mention right now, Ishti Bardos is on the line with us from Temple Israel in Memphis, and is a communications professional there and really does an exemplary job of sort of coming out from behind the logo and the brand to be a real person connecting with real people. Their rabbi, Adam Grossman, also tweets regularly. So they're encouraging their staff to be out and accessible and in conversation with people, which I think really shows something about the culture. You know, not all of what Rabbi Adam Grossman is tweeting is Jewish and rabbinic. Some of it is about, you know, the Oscars and the baseball game and where he took his kids out to dinner or whatever. But it helps people, even me, living 1,000 miles away, feel like I'm in relationship with this person because I know something about him. And one of the things that Ishti does that I really appreciate is he listens really carefully and responds and seeks opportunities to find stories and share those stories to connect people to one another. So, Allison, while I totally agree with you that those network weaver roles can be adopted by volunteers, I think it is useful for staff to be aware that those roles exist and just sort of tune their ears and eyes into that frequency to be really good listeners. You know, one of the things I find everybody has a challenge with social media is translating all of your social skills, right? So we're pretty good in person. We're sort of getting there on email. Most of us are decent on the phone. But how we translate those social skills into social media is really important. And again, this is where we make a mistake, picking up the bullhorn and just being a broadcaster, is that we're not in the broadcast business. We're in the relationship business. And to be a good socialite, whether you're at a cocktail party or at the grocery store or at your kid's soccer game or on staff of the synagogue, you need to be a good listener, not only a good talker. I encourage you to try and incorporate that into your professional role.
What a huge challenge for the Jewish community. Be good listeners. Okay.
We can still have opinions.
Well, we have a lot of them.
You can still have opinions. Obviously, I think most of you have figured this out already, but the one thing I forgot to say about Allison when I introduced her was that she is currently president of her congregation in Tarrytown, New York, and that for us has been a unique advantage. We actually had invited Allison to come to our leadership meeting a few weeks ago because being in the role of both being a congregation president and an expert on building relationships through social media and understanding the importance of facing outward. It was an extremely interesting and wonderful day when Allison came to work with us. I see that there's one more question. Michael offer. I don't know if the two of you can see it. Oh, there are a few more. Hold on. I'm looking at the questions log. We only have 5 minutes left. Yeah, you want to go ahead? You can pick whichever ones you like.
Sure. This is Lisa. I'll grab Michael's just to begin. I think it's a really important one. He asked, should congregations' social media strategy be used for additional purposes? In addition to creating connections with current members, marketing, outreach, expansion beyond the current congregation, is there a benefit to creating community beyond the current one? And adamantly, yes.
Yes.
This is one of the reasons just to make your boundaries more porous. In the network nonprofit, Allison talks about fortresses, right? Those sort of organizations that have big, thick, strong, tall, concrete walls, and there's insiders in and outsiders out. And I think synagogues, and it's not a good thing, I'll just add, and I think synagogues have a lot of fortressy attributes. The construct of membership in and of itself, I think, is one. The fact that we focus on so many things happening in the building is another. I think Hebrew ends up being one of those fortress walls. Even people who know a little bit of Hebrew and can sort of pick their way through it still feel sort of like an outsider. I feel that way myself, and I lived in Israel for a couple of years and went to Ulpan and did my very best to learn Hebrew, and I still feel that way. So I think we sort of have an uphill battle. But the more that we can make ourselves open and permeable and transparent and in conversation, all sorts of really interesting things happen. So while that might seem scary to sort of open ourselves up, right? Most of us have a security guard outside the door. Well, fling those doors wide open and be transparent and open, and all sorts of interesting things will happen. One of the first places that I met Ishti, who I mentioned a minute ago, was when a young person who was graduating from some university and moving to Memphis posted on their Facebook page at 9:30 at night, I'm moving to Memphis and I want to meet some people. And Ishti responded right away. So there's all sorts of opportunities for new members, new dues-paying members, to be there if your door really is open. We often say we're warm and welcoming, but what does that actually look like when I'm searching for Jewish life in a new city on Facebook at 11 o'clock at night? I think it's really important. I recommend you adopt about a 1-to-12 ratio. For every one time that you self-promote, you add value or build community 12 times. And sometimes that adding value actually is marketing. It is outreach. It's a link to an article about how to deal with grandparents at Hanukkah at an interfaith family, right? That's not self-promoting the congregation. That's adding value to a segment of people in your community who are actually wrestling with that. And if you, in addition to posting that link, ask a question, then you've got 5 or 10 interfaith families in your community talking to one another about how they manage those relationships and dealing with Christmas and whatnot. Not that there's a right or wrong answer. They're connecting with one another for mutual benefit and support and knowledge sharing, and everybody wins. So I think there's a really sort of magical moment you can have there, Michael, when you really do open yourself up. Lots of dividends will be paid.
So wonderful. I wanted to, on behalf of everyone in the group, thank both of you for a wonderful hour, and invite all of you to email us at skane@urj.org. Sally Kane is coordinating these. webinars. So if you have any questions, here's Lisa and Allison's email addresses, and mine is bseidel@urj.org. We'd be happy to continue this conversation. I know email isn't the right place, but we'll find a better place.
Well, I'll also just add that anyone who has remaining questions, I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them, is welcome to post them in the Facebook group. And I'll put the link here in the chat once again. It's a great place to put those questions, and I'm happy to answer them in the next few hours if you post them, or later in the week. And I'm sure that many of your peers, lay leaders, and staff at other congregations would be happy to chime in and share their experience as well.
It's a great idea. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Lisa and Allison.
All righty.
Thanks for having us.